Hey friends, what's up? It's Ethan Sawyer, the College Essay Guy, and welcome to the College Essay Guy podcast if this is your first time listening. My goal is to bring more ease, joy, and purpose to the college admission process. And this podcast is my way of interviewing the most brilliant minds in the college admissions world, analyzing their genius, and then breaking it down for you into a series of practical, actionable steps that you can take, whether you're applying to college yourself or helping somebody else apply. So this is the first in a series of interviews with current and former college admission officers where we go behind the scenes to let you know how things really work. This particular episode is with Kati Sweaney, former Senior Assistant Dean of Admission at Reed College. Kati, fun fact, is also a theater artist who's dramaturged and performed in Portland, Seattle, London, and Chicago, and was a college composition instructor at Northwestern University, my alma mater. Go Cats. In this episode, we get into what the life of an admission officer is really like, including what their travel season is like, some do's and don'ts for that initial email that you send or that you might send to an admissions office. What is demonstrated interest, and why does it matter for colleges to predict who actually ends up probably attending their school? We'll talk about some additional information sections that made a difference. This is like that little known or perhaps little studied section where you kind of write whatever you want to write. Not literally whatever you want to write, but we'll get into that in a little bit. You'll learn how fast admission officers really read the application, or at least how fast Kati read them at Reed. Read, yep. And we'll talk about some do's and don'ts for application essays, of course, because Kati's read about 25,000 of them by her estimation. All this and more coming up now. Kati, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, happy to be here.
So I don't know if we ever talked about this, but I'm really curious to know how you got into admissions in the first place.
Oh, yes. Great question. So the way I ended up in admission was, once upon a time when I was in college, I, did the tour guide thing for my admission office at Reed College, which is where I went. And then after Reed, I went off and I was in a PhD program at Northwestern I was there for about 6 years. And I got to do a lot of stuff that I loved, especially teaching was the thing that I absolutely adored about being there. But I eventually realized that I was actually more interested in some of the big picture questions about education, especially higher education. And I was getting less interested in the kind of really solitary research stuff that is, how you make your way as a professor. And so I ended up switching careers, and I was kind of looking at a lot of different things I might do as I was transitioning out of that PhD program. And lo and behold, a job in the admission office at Reed became available. And that is what ended up working. So not just by pure coincidence, I ended up right back where I started. And I found that admission was a good fit because it's actually very teaching related in many ways. There's so many presentations, it's students all the time. You're in so many high schools. So that's how I got there. And I loved it. Yeah, I was really lucky to end up that way.
So what kind of person would you say is drawn to working in admission?
I think all the people who end up in admission, you have to really believe in college, and you have to believe in education, and you have to love talking to lots and lots of students. It doesn't mean you have to be an extrovert. I'm not. I'm actually an introvert, but I'm also a theater person from way back. So I do a great impression of an extrovert. And I genuinely love connecting with people. And I just really, there's something about that time of life when you're kind of in your junior and senior year of high school that I have always related to still. Just the where you are and the way you're thinking about yourself and defining yourself, and that feeling of being about to take the next steps is actually a feeling I've always tried to kind of keep in my own life and allow myself to keep kind of returning to that and being like, let me think about who I really am and what I really want to do. And I think there's a certain amount of that you need if you're going to go into an admission. Admission, you got to be excited about folks of that age, and you have to just you have to really believe in the purpose of higher education, and because you're gonna, it's a profession where you work hard, and I think that can kind of be its own reward if it's really meaningful to you. But it is interesting that there's no there's just no one thing I can think of that really ties everyone together. Everyone is so different. It's interesting. It actually makes the profession really fun.
One of the things that you and I have talked about, and indeed a lot of admission reps talk about, is the rigors and the difficulty of travel season. Will
For
you
sure.
give us just a portrait of what travel season is and looks like? And, just so that students can get a sense of when these reps are coming into their schools, like what's going on in the life of the admission officer?
So travel season, I mean, the word to describe it is intense. There's no question that that's what it's like for really any level. I mean, admission officers might be in their very first season, or they might be deans and directors of admission and have been doing it their whole career. And it's still, travel season is kind of the same. It doesn't, those rigors that you mentioned, Ethan, are kind of the same, for everyone who does travel.
And just to do like a
yeah.
101 thing for folks who have no idea what I mean by travel season, will you just give a little sense of what travel season is and when it is?
Absolutely. So I think of the whole admission year for an admission counselor as it has 4 seasons, just like, our seasons. They map onto, travel happens in fall. Reading, when you're actually reading the applications, mostly happens in the winter. Spring is our yield season, and yield means that's when you've admitted people, and then you need to convince those admitted people to actually come. And then the summer is more of a planning season. So we actually do travel a little bit in all those other seasons, but the bulk of your travel is going to take place during the fall. I actually met a lot of students on the road and parents on the road who didn't always immediately realize that I was someone who was visiting from out of town. Because it's actually the case, there are some offices that have what are called regional reps. And a regional rep might work for a college in Boston, but the rep actually lives in San Francisco. And so it's just easier for that person to travel around, and they know the area really well. So that's the case for some reps. But the bulk of the reps you meet at your high school or at a college fair have traveled from their campus, their home campus, to come to you. We make a lot of effort to come out and see you. So it's something that we're really dedicated to doing.
And so give us like an insight into like what the typical day is of travel when you're on the road.
Totally. So it's going to vary a little bit from college to college, but for the most part, you're going to get up really early in the morning because a lot of your day for most reps is going to be spent visiting high schools. You are probably going to visit between 3 and 5 high schools a day. That's a lot. And then after you visited those schools, you usually have some kind of evening event, and that could vary. That might be interviews. Some colleges don't offer interviews with reps, but some colleges do. And if you're visiting an area, it's a great chance to personally interview some of the students who live there. So you might do that. You might do that for a couple of hours, as many as 4 or 5 hours in the evening after school. Or you might go to a college fair, and those are held at different places. Sometimes they're held at high schools or community centers or even convention centers if it's a big one. And college fairs tend to be, if they're not on a weekend, so if they're on a weekday night, they're late. So you probably won't get out of there until 9. So your work day, might start at 7:30 and not be done until 9 p.m. And so, the main thing that I would want you to picture your rep doing during travel season is just basically living in a rental car. Like, the rental car is your office, and it is like a sacred space. You're taking phone calls in your rental car. I did a job interview in a rental car one time. You're taking naps in your rental car. You are, some people watch TV on their phones in the rental car because you get these tiny little breaks. You might have like, oh, great, I got to this high school half an hour early, so I'm going to park around the corner and, have my little me time. So you just need that little time to recharge. And so that's a lot of what it is. It's not super glamorous. But yeah, that's a big part of it, is rental car life for sure.
And what are some of your goals as you're out there? Like when you're going to these schools, what are you doing and what are you doing out there?
Yeah. Why do we do this?
Why?
Yeah,
Why
okay.
do all this? Why go through all this?
I know. Yeah. So the phrase that we use in the profession is territory management. That's what we're doing. So here's what that means. So territory refers to the fact that every admission counselor is going to have a region of the United States or the world that they're in charge of. And that means it often means that's the counselor who's the first person to read the applications that come from that area. It's that counselor. Sometimes schedules don't work out that the counselor can do every single bit of travel to that region, especially in seasons that aren't the fall. Like if there's a spring event, the school might just send whoever's available. But for the most part, you are the counselor who oversees that territory and tries to know it better than anyone else. So if you're going to read all the applications from that area, you kind of want to know what it's like to live there. So it helps. It helps me so much to just literally drive around and kind of get a vibe for what might it be like to grow up in this place and go to school in this place. And then getting to actually be inside high schools was beneficial to me. Obviously, it was much better for everyone if students were able to come to my visit, but I totally get that like sometimes your calculus teacher, won't let you out of your class. Even if I don't get to meet anyone, it actually just helps me to sit in your high school for a little while and see what your environment is like. Because then when I read your application, I can picture you in a very literal way. I can picture your context, and that's exciting. So territory management comprises a few different things. Like I mentioned, school visits is one of them. Now, I don't know. So I had no idea that school visits existed when I was in high school, and I went to a public school in Northern California. And I think they were happening. I just don't think I knew they were happening. So sometimes your high school might advertise them to you. But one tip that I have for you is even if you're not hearing about college visits, it doesn't necessarily mean that the colleges aren't coming to your school. Ways that you could find out might actually be to visit the college's website, because sometimes they'll post their travel schedule and they'll let you know when they'll be at your school. When I worked at Reed, we would actually send an email to all the folks who were on our mailing list who went to a given high school to let them know when we would be there. So you'd hear directly from us. So that's a good reason to like jump on the mailing list of any school. And the reason we do school visits, in addition to being able to understand your context, is because we want to make sure that students who may not be able to come visit us are still getting a little bit of face time with us. So it is absolutely the best chance to connect kind of one-on-one. Also, not every college, depends on the school, but not every college will post on their website who the territory managers are for a given region. But if you go to the school visit, you'll not only meet that person, but you'll be able to get their business card with their direct phone and their email. And then if you have any kind of an issue or question during the time when you're trying to submit your application or after it's been submitted, you know exactly how to get a hold of that person, even if the website wouldn't necessarily help you find that out. So it's a great opportunity to do that.
Will you say just a little bit about like college fairs?
Absolutely, yeah. So college fairs, similar to school visits. Here's the thing about college fairs. When I went to them as a high school student, they just felt they're huge almost always. They're loud and they feel a little impersonal just because there's so much going on and so many colleges there. And I would encourage anyone to treat a college fair exactly the way you would treat a school visit. We wouldn't have traveled all that way unless we genuinely wanted to meet you and we actually want to have a conversation with you. So if you go to a college fair and all you do, and I totally get this again, because it's intimidating, I think, sometimes, that environment, all these people standing behind tables. I don't know if you've ever been to a college fair, but that's what it looks like, and if you go up to the tables, you just grab a bunch of brochures. Maybe your mom or your dad is there and they ask the rep a few questions. I totally understand why that might be your impulse, but don't pass up that opportunity to really talk to the person who's come all this way to meet you. You can really have a conversation. And I remember people really well that I met at college fairs. One thing that you'll do if you go to a college fair, you'll fill out sometimes a thing called an inquiry card, and this is like literally a card that has like a space for you to write your name and your email and your address and your high school. And what I would do as a rep is when I got a great conversation going with a student, I would flip that card over once they had left and they'd filled out their info on it. I would flip the card over to the back and I would make notes about who that person was and what they had done that was cool and why I remembered them. And when I took my big stack of cards back to my office, when I would go home, I would be able to put notes in that person's file, and then, forever be able to remember that I had a great conversation with them. So college fairs can be a tool to actually have that personal connection, even though they don't always look like they're going to be a personal place.
I wonder if there are any specific examples you can think of students that you met either at high schools or at a college fair that, something they said or something you talked about stuck in your mind.
Oh, man. Yeah, there are a lot of kids that I remember meeting for a variety of reasons. At college fairs, the ones I remember most are the ones who ask the best questions. And interestingly, that's also true for interviews as well. So that's a third thing that we may be doing on the road as college reps. So again, some colleges may not offer that interview, but if colleges do, then they'll definitely do some on the road. So the thing about interviews that I know can be trickier to prepare for is you're kind of reviewing your own life and your own activities, coming up with answers to the interviewer's questions. But I would highly recommend that you be ready to ask the interviewer some questions too, because the people who I remember so well are the people who asked me questions about me. And I don't mean in like a way totally disconnected to the college, but I just have this very clear memory of only two students over the hundreds that I interviewed on the road who asked me a question about like, how is my fall going? What is travel like? They actually asked me some of the same questions you're asking me, Ethan. It's just like, what are you doing when you travel out here? And don't worry, like it's fine that you don't know that. I mean, they're just there to help you learn anything you want to know. You can ask them how their fall's going. You can ask them why they decided to work at the college they work at, what they like about it. You can ask them who they are and what they're interested in. I mean, just practicing that empathy and that curiosity is really powerful. And it made that student unforgettable for me. And of course, that's always what you want. That is a hugely valuable thing for you as an applicant. If I will never forget who you are, and when your name pops up in committee and I can be like, oh, this person, I remember this person so clearly, that's a great way to stand out. And so, yeah, just being empathetic towards your counselor is a great way to make sure that we can remember you.
I love this point. This resonates when I was interviewing for, like as a Northwestern interview, as an alumni interview and meeting students, it was so rare that a student would like flip it. And when they did, it was sort of like, oh, here's a student who's confident and willing to be curious and who's, at ease enough that they can sort of turn the camera back on me. And it created this sense of like, equality, a little bit less, I've got the thing that they want and here they're trying to like get it, right? It's more like, hey, here's a human that I'm sitting across from and we're just talking about life and stuff. And it suddenly put us on more equal footing. And I found that I relaxed a lot more and we laughed more. And so, but you're right, it was like super rare. And a quick side note, because I'm going to put this in the show notes, but for students who are hearing this and going, oh my God, I have no idea what kind of questions to ask. If you Google or just go in the show notes, College Essay Guy Interview Guide, we have a list of questions that you can potentially ask your interviewer. So there's like a specific resource for that. And then there's another one that will link to this. And we're going to talk about demonstrated interest in just a minute. But in the guide to demonstrated interest, there are 4 tips to like developing an authentic relationship with your rep. When When students, like, let's say they get your card and they've had maybe a connection with you and they're feeling like they want to email you because they really want to let you know that they're super excited about the school, but they have no idea what to
Yeah.
say. What are some,
Yeah.
give us some do's and don'ts for like that initial email contact?
Yeah. Oh, that's such a great question. Yes. Okay. So great idea. Always a good idea. If you ever get a business card, honestly, this is good advice for your life with a job too in the future, right? Like whenever you get a business card, do something with it, follow up with it, with the person in some way. And so here's a thing that that I discovered both in admission and in other areas of my life. It actually, you might feel like asking them a question is you trying to get them to do extra work or do you a favor or something. But there's actually research, like psychological research on this, that like when you ask people a question or you ask them for help, they're more likely to respond positively to that than if you send the email that I totally get might feel more natural to send, which is like, let me tell you a little bit about who I am and why I'm interested in your college. Sincerely, Katie.
Right.
I get why that feels like a comfort zone, but actually just ask them the question you want the answer to. And it could be about anything. It could be about like, I want to know a little more about your, what's the food like on campus, literally anything like that. So that gives the rep something specific to do when they respond to you. And it's much more likely to create a little email chain. And those email chains will be a way for the rep to continue engaging with you instead of like, there's not really much I can say in response to a question that's just like, or a statement of like who you are. And I'm delighted to hear about you, but my response to that can really only be so great to meet you. Get in touch if you have any other questions. It kind of doesn't allow the conversation to continue. I would ask for specific examples. One thing I loved it when people would ask is something like, what's a cool thing that a biology major has done? Part of my job is I actually spent a lot of time memorizing cool things that people in every single department at Reed had done. And I was so pumped when I got to use those examples. So that sounds a little weird. It sounds like it feels like you might be asking them to work harder, but that is our whole job. Exactly like I said in the beginning, we would not do this work if we weren't really into the idea of college, the college we work for, and also really into answering your questions. So it usually gives us a lot of energy to be able to answer the specific questions like that. So don't be afraid of feeling like you're challenging us a teeny bit. Yeah.
So talk to us a little bit about this thing that we've mentioned already called demonstrated interest, and set it up. What is demonstrated interest and how does it play into some of the stuff we've been talking about?
Yes, great question, because this is definitely a phrase that no one talked about when I was applying to colleges. It's become a phenomenon in fairly recent years, so It's a great thing to make sure everyone knows about. So demonstrated interest to the college means how often did the student take advantage of opportunities to make contact with us? So that is essentially, it means it's just this idea of like colleges want to know if you are putting effort out there to get to know them and to kind of get that face time with them. And one of the reasons, well, there's a variety of reasons why demonstrated interest has come up. I mean, one of the reasons I think that it is part of the landscape now in a way it didn't used to be, I think it partly just literally has to do with the technology, because tracking demonstrated interest does take a database that works in a certain way. It takes software that works in a certain way. The one thing that you all may know or you may not know is that marketing software, and this is not just colleges, this is basically anyone who's sending you a marketing email, that software can tell if you opened the email and it can tell if you clicked on links in the email. And so stuff like that statistically influences, there's a relationship basically between how often people take actions with emails and then how often they are or how likely they are to do something. The reason, to my mind, having been part of the admission profession, here's why I think demonstrated interest plays a role. It's become important to colleges. It's not because we're trying to surveil you. make sure that we can know it's nice to know as much as we can about a student, but that's not really the goal. The goal is we as a college are trying to work through the fact that students just apply to way more colleges than they used to. I mean, the average number of colleges that the last time I looked at the data from the National Association of College Admission Counselors, it said, I think it's 8 colleges. That's the average number of colleges that an American student applies to. And that's really high, especially when you consider that's an average. So half the people are applying to more than that, right? So it used to be that a college could say, back when people only really applied to like 3 or 4 colleges, it used to be a college could say, oh, they did all the work to send us an application. They're definitely interested. So it demonstrated interest wasn't really a factor. But now when people might be applying to 10, 15, 20 colleges, the fact that they've sent you an application might not mean what it used to. So that added factor of demonstrated interest might be the thing that helps a college predict whether this is just a school that's on your list to be on your list, or whether this is one of the schools that you were really putting effort into. So I would say, just in the same way that you would look at your list in general, and you might have, the schools that you're super, super interested in, those are the ones that you do want to put the demonstrated interest effort into.
So just to put this in perspective, from the flip side is like the college used to have a 1 in 4 chance of getting you as an applicant. And now they've got more like a 1 in 10, or 1 in 20 chance of getting you. And why do they care so much, Katie? Like, why does it matter that they can predict who's going to go, like who's going to ultimately yield and attend their school?
Yeah, totally. It's because, so the number of people a college has to admit to get, so an incoming class, let's say they want an incoming class of 500 freshmen. They're going to admit a lot more than 500 people in order to get that class, a lot more. And so they have to have some degree of ability to predict how many of those people, like they need a certain percentage of the people they admit to come. And so there's a certain amount of statistical modeling that goes into it, just because it's a lot of students and a lot of data, and different pieces of data influence things differently. So just like everything that a student might do, or every fact about a student kind of has statistical weight, basically. Now, I'm talking a lot about statistics and numbers. And so you might be getting the impression like, oh, this is all done by machine now. And I can promise you it is definitely not because, we've just been talking about this at great lengths. Ethan, I would point to that example of your colleague who met a student at a college fair and was like, oh yeah, I love this kid. I remember this kid. I know a lot about them. That's why I want to admit them. That absolutely happens. And a machine can't do that. So, but that big modeling picture is still really important. And the reason it's important is because colleges get their money from tuition. I mean, that's kind of, that's how they stay in business, is they get tuition money. So if they're not able to bring in a class of the right size, then they don't have enough money to run the college. And so that's kind of why they have to think about all these big statistical questions. So the deal with demonstrated interest overall is it's a factor. We talk about it a lot. It can feel kind of mysterious. It's not the factor. It is nowhere near as important as some of the other things in your application. And I can tell you from experience, of course, like if you have amazing grades, your essay is great, just your teachers rave about you, and you've never made contact with the college, you're probably still going to get admitted. It's not about, demonstrated interest trumping things. It's just one more thing on a long list of, 20 different factors that we consider.
So some of the ways you mentioned demonstrating interest are like, meeting them at college fairs, if they come to your school, meeting them, following up with an email. Give us a couple other ways.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. This is such a good question, because what I would never want a student to think is that if you're a student who is, let's say you live in rural Wisconsin and you don't live near the schools that you're interested in going to because they're all on the West Coast. you might think, well, I can't visit, I can't do an interview, I can't demonstrate interest. And that's totally not true, because demonstrated interest is contextual, like everything else about you as a student. So in the same way that a college wouldn't, try to blame you for, like, if your high school doesn't offer that many APs, we're not going to judge you by the same standard that we would judge a student whose school offered 25 APs, right? Same deal. If you live in rural Wisconsin, and you can't visit, but you read all our emails and you've called us a couple times, you figured out who your regional rep is, you called them, you asked them questions, you had an email chain going with one of them, that is demonstrating a ton of interest relative to your context. And I know students, when I worked at Reed, I knew students there who, the first time they visited Reed was the day they showed up for orientation. And the fact that they came to orientation means that they were able to get in. So we're definitely, always, every college is looking at students in that context. And then another way to demonstrate interest that I think is crucial and important to what you do, Ethan, is essays. Good essays demonstrate interest, especially if the college has essays that are specific to their school. So that means, like at Reed, we had we used the Common App, and we would have a central Common App essay that all the colleges could see, but then there was a Reed specific essay that you would write, or there are the UC essays, or there are the Apply Texas essays, they are their own prompts. If you are writing essays tailored to those schools, then that's demonstrating interest in a very strong way, because that's such a great way to show that you've done your research. You have a genuine personal connection to the school. You can picture yourself there. And remember, that's what the school's trying to do. They're trying to picture you there as well. So that's a great way that I think might be kind of overlooked as a part of the demonstrated interest puzzle.
I want to get into, in a minute, your reading pace, because I'm interested in that. And I think students are probably interested in it. But first, I want to know, are there any cool additional info moments or stories that you feel like did make a difference in the application?
Okay. The most important function overall that additional info served for me as a reader was...
we should explain what that is. Sorry, some people may not know what that is.
Yes. Absolutely. So the additional info section is a portion of the Common App. And then there's some other application forms that will include something similar. And the prompt for this section is something, it's almost exactly like, is there anything you wanted to share that you haven't had the chance to share elsewhere in your application? And we will always advise, and when I say we, I mean colleges, but I also mean college counselors who work at high schools or independently, will always advise that that's the section to use if you want to talk about why you randomly got a C in chemistry and you don't feel like that represents who you are as a student, or you got sick and it affected your grades or your performance, or just kind of that life context we wouldn't be able to pick up from somewhere else. That's always the thing that I found. I would read those really closely, and I would include that stuff in my notes about a student's application, because that's always really helpful context. So I would say that's number one helpful thing you can do with additional information. When it comes to supplements and whatnot, the ones I remember are the ones that are directly connected to, so let's say that the essay was about the student's photography or something about who they are and how they think and how they view the world. And then this is kind of the same example I gave before, but then the supplement is, so there's like a direct connection. I can kind of see the flow from one thing to another. And I think there's a way to create that flow, even if it's not as direct as, this is the same topic as my essay. I think it might be like, let's say you're an engineer and your whole application is about engineering, but you also play the cello or you also draw cartoons. That would absolutely be great if you say something, if you're so what that you're putting before your little supplement is like, I love engineering, but I also have a creative side, and it's also it's important to me to explore ideas through other media. So here are my cartoons, so like that is a way to kind of create that flow for the reader, because you're telling them what they're supposed to take away from the fact that you draw cartoons. It's the fact that you're a well-rounded person who thinks in broad, nuanced ways about the world.
Right. So talk to us about how fast you read. What was your record?
For many colleges, your application is first read. So read for the first time, almost always by the territory manager, who we talked about earlier. Then it is almost always second read, and it'll be second read usually by kind of a random member of the office. And this is really helpful to us as admission counselors, because then we get to read applications from all over the country and the world in addition to our territory. So we're seeing the whole pool. That's great. And then the application goes to committee. So I quote unquote read applications in different contexts. My average time for reading a first read was 12 minutes and 30 seconds, 12 minutes and 30 seconds.
Wow. That actually surprises me because my friends who read for the UCs are like, 4 minutes, maybe 5. Right.
Yep. It's different, but every school is different. And Reed, so that just kind of gives you some information about how Reed does stuff. We're very, it's a small school, whereas the UCs are large schools. We are really, really, because we're small, deeply invested in like the kind of community we're building. So we have to think really carefully about who someone is in addition to what grades they're bringing. And I'm not saying the UCs don't think like that. It's just their form is set up to feature different information. And Reed, for example, asks for 2 full-length essays in every application. I would second read an application in anywhere from like, I would say probably 4 minutes would be my average for a second read. A second read is not always a full read. It's more like you read the first reader's comments and then you're kind of double checking everything. And then in committee, the average time an application spends in committee, it really varies. The committee is where the whole admission team votes on an application. And that some files only need to be up there for 1 minute. Some files we might take 10 or 15 minutes to discuss. Hugely varies depending on, and that's why we go into committee, so we can make sure every voice is heard and different perspectives can be brought to bear on different applications.
Which applications go to committee?
Most of them at a place like Reed are going to get more than one look, and they will, it depends, kind of depends on the year. It depends on, things will change over time. The thing is, if I first read an application and the student is so extraordinary, every number is amazing, the essay, is extraordinary. I'm not even going to send that application for a second read. I'm just going to admit, put that in the admit pile. Doesn't mean that it won't be looked at later. I'll talk about that in a minute, but I'm not going to send it through that full multiple read process. Similarly, if I'm looking at an application and someone like set fire to their high school and got straight Fs, like I'm not going to send that through, the multiple reads either.
Right.
So it's the extremes that don't go through that process. That middle zone, it's actually really helpful for us to see as many files as a group as we can, because then as a group, we can make more informed decisions because we've seen the scope of the pool. And then after committee, things aren't done, because then that's where the leadership of the office, the vice president and dean and director, are going to think through some of that big picture class shaping stuff. And I've spoken to multiple deans of admission who say that they have their eyes in every single application that is submitted to their college. Obviously, that's not going to apply to like a giant school, but to some of the small liberal arts schools, it's a lot of different people are going to see your application. So, I think that's helpful to think about when you're putting it together. Like, it's really going to get serious consideration at some schools. So
let's get even deeper. Let's get even deeper into the essays. First, I'm just curious, have you ever counted how many essays you've read?
I have. I did this math recently. I'll lay it out for you. So, like I said, Reed has 2 essays per application. I was reading about 25 applications per day on my reading days. So those days when I was at home under a blanket. So 2 essays per app, 25 apps per day. That's about 50 essays a day. And let's say I was reading 4 days a week, give or take, for about 2 months, give or take. So that's about 1,600 essays. And that's just first reads. You can do second reads a lot faster, like I mentioned. So let's just, for the sake of argument, say that I second read double the number of first reads that I did. So if we go through that same math, 2 essays per second read, 50 second reads a day. So that would be 3,200 second read essays. So at least 4,800 essays every season between first and second reads. And none of that counts the essays that would come up in committee. So a very conservative estimate of how many applications I read, how many essays I read in just 5 years at Reed is about 25,000 essays.
Awesome. So this positions you beautifully for this next part. So talk to us about essays. What should students do? What should they not do?
Yes. All right. So what are we thinking when we read essays? So we are thinking about what we really want is we want to remember who you are. What a main goal of the essay is to allow. So have you ever seen the movie Admission with like Tina Fey and Paul Rudd?
I haven't actually seen it, but I've heard a lot about it.
Yeah. So it's not a great movie. But they definitely did their research on like how admission officers work. And there's a thing that happens when Tina Fey, she plays I think a Princeton admission officer, totally fictional movie, but she is reading applications. And when the application is good, this like tiny version of the student like pops up on her desk and stands there and talks to her about who they are. That's what you want. Like you want this feeling that like we are picturing you and you've like come into my living room, with my cat and my cup of tea to tell me about who you are. Like that's what we're looking for in that essay. And we really want that sense of getting to know you on a personal level. And that's totally possible to do that, showing yourself on a personal level. That's possible to do even if the essay prompt is a little more functional. Like some essay prompts are like, tell us why you're interested in the engineering program and what experience you have. You can totally answer that question by using a story that allows us to take away a few adjectives about who you are, a sense of how your mind works, a sense of what kind of college student you're going to be. Because at the end of the day, that's our job. That's why humans do this, because we are there to craft a class and think about what community we want to build at the school we work for. So you really want to get your application reader to remember who you are so they can advocate for you later, because once it's been first read and second read, and that was weeks ago, and then your application pops up in committee, you want the thing to happen where I see your name pop up on, the projection screen where we're putting applications so we can all look at them together. I want to see your name and immediately be able to go, oh, this is a person who wrote about, how her dog wears costumes. Right. Something specific about you, or some, just like, oh, I remember like the feeling that I got from this application. It's a very empathetic person, or this is a very, passionate and excited person about, this passion. And that's really memorable. The person who had a grandparent die, or the person who got a sports injury. I know those are really deeply important stories, but they don't stick in my brain the way those tiny little details about who you are do.
And why are those tiny little details so important?
So the tiny little details, not only do they help us remember who you are, but I think when you take the time to dig in, and like all the, techniques that you use, Ethan, are so good at helping students actually use the essay writing process to think about who they are and really have to answer some questions about what they're looking for out of their life, and who they are at this moment, where they've come from. Like when a student has taken the time to do that, they're giving me a picture of what kind of person they might be in the classroom, and what kind of roommate they might be and what kind of classmate they might be. So that's really important. And the other thing about a tiny detail if you're just trying to kind of put all your info in, if you're trying to sort of, and I get this, right? You've done really cool things in high school. You want to make sure that you use your essay to tell me about all of them. You don't want to leave anything out. But that's really hard. It's like I'm skimming over your entire biography and there's nothing for me to grab. And when I can't grab anything clearly in your essay, then I don't know what your so what is. And the so what is absolutely crucial. And it's crucial in part because of how fast we're reading. If you don't tell me what your real topic is or what your real takeaway is until the end of the essay, or it's kind of buried somewhere in there, I don't know. I may be able to figure out what story you're telling me, but I don't know why you're telling it to me. And I don't know what I'm supposed to remember about who you're going to be on our campus. So that's why the so what is so important. And I think those smaller topics make it easier for you to decide what your so what is, because you have to go yourself when you're picking that smaller topic. You're going to be like, why am I writing about this necklace that I always wear? You have to answer that so what question for yourself, and then that will help you answer it for us.
Yeah. I'm loving what you're laying down here. For folks who are listening and are like, tell me more about the so what. If y'all Google Ira Glass on storytelling, he's got a little 3 or 4 part YouTube video that's like on this thing we're talking about. And it's like he talks about 2 parts of a story, and the second one is the so what. And he also does a really nice job. I think you're doing a great job of explaining what that is and why it's important. Give me a sense. Are there a couple essays that you can remember that were just like, they were awesome? For some reason, they stuck in your mind. After reading 25,000 essays, here are the ones that you remember.
Yeah. There are 2 that come right to mind. One is actually a why read essay. Anyone applying to read is aware that read actually doesn't have a why read essay anymore. They changed the topic. I was part of that process of changing the topic. But I did read why read essays for 1 year. And there's one of them that I always remember. And then the second essay is an example of how to take a risky topic and make it work really well. So I'll talk about the why read essay that worked so well. So this is a student who, if you're familiar with Reed, you know that it's a place that's known for being a home for folks who are intellectual and like kind of interested in everything. It's deeply liberal arts. Everyone's going to take coursework in a wide range of different areas. And so this student, the way they framed their why read essay was they started it out and they said something like, I could tell you why read, but first I need to tell you about the life cycle of this insect that I got really interested in last year. Oh, and next I have to tell you about my research on, medieval Italian clockmakers. And it kind of went on like that. And it had this great flow. There was sort of a clear picture of the student that was emerging from this. And then after this lovely, like, oh, I love, these ideas and I can see how they're connecting and oh, I guess that's why read.
Boom.
And it was such a great move because so good. Oh man, it was still, it would have been a great essay period, whether the why read framing was there or not, but like it always reminded me of how the best way to approach a why us essay, if you're applying to a college that has one of those, is at most 20% of that essay is going to be about the college. At least 80% of it needs to be about you, because they know about them. You've heard me talk in this podcast about how much information I have to memorize as an admission officer about the school that I work for so that I can answer questions about literally any major program on campus. I think the admission office actually knows the college better than many other constituents because they have to memorize everything. So they know all the stuff about the college. And while I get that you want to show you've done research, and there's totally room for you to do that, it's not about showing the breadth of your research about the college. It's about depth. It's about the depth of your connection to what they're doing. So pick one thing about that college to focus on. And the thing that student in my example did was they picked that nature of like inquiry and the way people think at Reed and the kind of intellectual character at Reed. That was the thing the student was showing they deeply connected with. And they were doing it in a very much show, don't tell kind of way.
I love
and it would be fine. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I loved that essay.
Well, I want to jump in and say that, like, when I have like 3 different ways that I teach this. And one way, like the basic solid one is like do the research, find those reasons and make sure that they connect back to you. And then there's
Yep.
like a more advanced level, which is like find, 3 or 4 specific things about the school that totally set the school apart from any other school and connect those back to you. And then like the advanced level is what you're talking about here, which is like pick one specific value, like intellectual curiosity or, sense of place. For example, Bowden asked in the past, what is their sense of place? And then show that quality like to the nth degree. And that's an advanced way of like really stepping out. So I say that to students, and heads up, some try it and it just doesn't work. And so they kind of go back to like, giving the research and the bunch of reasons. But I just want to like praise hands what you're saying.
No, and I completely agree. I think this particular essay was written by someone who was just a tremendous writer and whose kind of natural voice tended towards those things. And different people have different writing voices. And there was a phrase I would use a lot to describe students, because Reed has really great science programs, so we would see a ton of scientists come through, even though it was a liberal arts college. And I had this phrase I would bring up in my notes on apps, and I would say, oh, this student writes like a scientist. And what I meant by that was like, this essay is crystal clear. It is full of evidence to back up every single claim. That it isn't like poetic or it's personal, but it's very straightforward. And I get exactly what the so what is, and it's rock solid in its construction, but it doesn't have to be sort of lyrical in the way that this person's natural writing voice was. And writing like a scientist is a spectacular trait. It will make you such a good essay writer when you actually get into a college classroom. So there's nothing wrong with that. And if your way of going about it is what Ethan is mentioning, boom, like that's great. You're going to get the job done just as well.
Love it. Give us the other one.
The other essay, okay, so this is an advanced maneuver. and the reason I like to tell this story is because partly I just want to like shine a light on how awesome this essay was and how I'll never forget it. But I also want to, I use it to show how if you're going to pick a topic that's kind of risky, there are things you have to do in order to make it work as an essay. So this was an essay about pooping. And believe it or not, it was extraordinary. So this may be too gross. So I apologize to anyone if it is. But I never have forgotten it.
Anybody who doesn't poop, do not listen. Go ahead.
So here's the topic. It started out with this image of the student, and this was a woman, and she had started this one-woman campaign at her high school because she found out that a lot of her female classmates were unwilling to do a number 2 at their high school. And so she decided that this was crap. Haha. And she put posters all over the women's room that were like these funny exhortations about like why it's like everyone does it. It's totally fine. It's kind of like in a body acceptance sort of way. And then the essay transitioned into telling this story about how after this being kind of a thing that she did at her high school, she was later diagnosed with a medical condition where she couldn't poop in the way that one would like to. And she drew this incredible connection between like, I was trying to advocate for freedom and, body acceptance. But then I kind of learned that body acceptance might take different forms at different times of your life. You can't, your body's going to do what it wants to. And I kind of got a new like appreciation for why maybe some of my classmates were thinking about this. It was really funny, but it was there was a very clear so what. There was a lesson learned. There was an arc that took place. It like in the hands of another writer, it would probably not have worked, but it was so very much her story. And you could also tell that she had, this was definitely a student who'd like gotten great support, from her high school in terms of like putting together an awesome application. So there were folks who were experienced who were kind of looking at this essay and saying like, yep, I understand. Here are the things that it's doing right, and it's going to work. So that is an essay I will never, ever forget.
Katie, what advice would you give to parents?
It is such a gift to any student to have parents who are involved in the application process. Not every student has that support, and it's so exciting to see parents who are involved as an admission counselor. And I also would say to parents involved in the process to just make sure your student is not only guiding that process, but is also really taking the reins as far as communication is concerned. When a parent needs to call an admission counselor, totally great. If you're calling about financial aid, if you're calling about the logistics of a visit, if the parent is calling the admission counselor to ask a question about the biology department or what are the dorms like, then I start to wonder how interested really is the student in this school. And I mean, I hope it goes without saying that parents calling is not the student demonstrating interest. And if it's just, if a parent and a student come up to me at a college fair and the student is not really talking to me and kind of looking to their parent to speak to me, I'm really happy to share that information with the parent, but I wonder what might be gained by the parent and student kind of dividing and conquering and visiting different tables at different times. And the reason for that is, when your student goes to college, they will be on their own and they will be talking to professors who might be kind of intimidating on their own. And they will be figuring out how to navigate, bureaucratic stuff and doing laundry and getting haircuts and all the things that you have to do. And it's a great opportunity that senior year to start letting them take a few of those risks. And some of them might be risks. It might mean that some of the work doesn't get done as fast as you might like it to. And that's nerve-wracking and understandable, but that is what college is going to be like. And because I used to teach college, I've seen really clearly what are the skills that make folks successful in an actual college classroom. And those soft skills of being able to kind of make your own way as a person are actually more valuable. The B student with extraordinary soft skills might be a more successful college student than the straight A student who is missing some of those soft skills. So that's just something to think about as part of the process.
What do you hope students will keep in mind as they go through this process?
Oh man, I know that it is stressful, and I just kind of want to affirm that that's real, because I know it may sometimes feel like, anytime you have contact with an admission officer, you need to be like, hey, I'm my bubbliest, greatest self. And that may be true. You kind of want to project that, but it's okay. It's okay to feel stressful. It's a lot going on. It's like having a full-time job on top of your senior year classes. And I also think that I as someone who loves college and deeply believes in college and all the possibilities of education, at its very best, the process of finding a college and going to college is a deeply transformative process of understanding who you are. And I really hope that that is something that you can find somewhere in your application process, whether that's through writing the essays or through really deeply evaluating which colleges are right for you, what should be on your list. Just listen really closely to yourself. And it might mean needing to tune out a lot of noise to find that signal, but don't be afraid to give yourself that space and kind of listen to yourself if you're feeling doubts, if you're feeling your gut is just telling you stuff. Listen to your gut at this moment. So I just really hope that everyone gets to enjoy how cool this process can be too.
Katie, I could do this all day. I'm so grateful.
Yeah, I know.
I'm so grateful for your time and thanks for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, thank you, Ethan. It's always great to talk to you and I'm really happy to be here.
Hey friends, that's the show. Thanks for listening. In the show notes, you'll find resources that we talked about, like the College Essay Guy interview guide, the guide to demonstrated interest, and there's a really cool clip that I mentioned from Ira Glass on storytelling. By the way, if you're not subscribed to the CEG YouTube channel, search College Essay Guy on YouTube, and I put out videos each week. It's got pretty much all the things. Tune in next time for another behind the scenes of the admission office with Tom Campbell, formerly of Pomona College. That's it. Be well and stay curious.